Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. This is episode number 60. And tonight we are going to be talking about routines and setting up the routines that we need primarily to help set us up for success when we're using inquiry. So I know for a lot of teachers, when they start using or want to use inquiry in their classroom, one of the biggest barriers is worrying about the lack of control that you might have in your classroom, or kind of the chaos that comes from letting go a little bit of that teacher control that we're all so used to and we grew up with in school. However, inquiry is so rewarding that it's worth it. But in order to do it well, it makes it a lot easier if you pre-plan and set up those rules, routines, and systems that happen in your classroom so that when it does come time to be in a full-blown inquiry project and it does seem a little bit more chaotic, you and your students can rely on those routines. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And if you stick through to the end of the video, I am going to share with you how to get my planning template so that you can sit down and plan through all of the routines that you might need to think of before school starts. So if you're new to the show, my name is Patty and I am the teacher blogger behind madlylearning.com. And I am a 4-5 split grade teacher, and I've been teaching for 11 years in Ontario, Canada. And I come live every week talking about inquiry-based learning in my classroom, what that looks like, and how we can use more inquiry in our classroom. And it's my goal to be able to support you as classroom teachers in using more inquiry as well. So if at any point in time you've got questions or comments, or you just want to say hello, please feel free to pop those in the comments. I love having interaction during a live show to say hello. So if you want to give me a little wave to let me know you're here, I would love to say hi. So the very first thing is we have to look at the routines for transitions. So we want to definitely have in our classroom, we have what I like to think of as 3 or 4 different styles of routines that we want to have in our classroom. One are the calls to action. So where we have a system in place where we have a signal for students and it prompts them to take an action in our classroom. We also have transition routines where we have a series of steps that we want our students to complete, things like home time or transition from working to whole group instruction. Those transition times are another form of routine that we want to put in place, as well as we want to look at some of the routines that we put around movement and how students move within our classroom. Because if we are allowing more freedom and choice in our room, that sometimes comes with more movement. So we definitely want to pre-plan what that movement in our classroom is going to look like. And because we might be working with a lot of small groups, or if you're like me and you teach a split grade, you might be working with another grade. We also want to plan in those times where the teacher might be busy and what our students have to do. So we'll start right away with the calls to action. So these are your signals that you are going to gather for attention. So they are words, sounds, or phrases that you might have in your classroom, and they get their input from your teacher and they tell students what it is that they're supposed to do next. So you want an attention grabber. You want something. Part of a routine is you want there to be a phrase, a signal, or a sound that signals to students to stop, look, and listen because you're about to give a next instruction. So there's a ton of different signal grabbing attentions that you can find all over, and I will definitely link to those in the show notes and the blog post for you to get a lot of different ideas. For me, myself, I like to keep keep it simple, I use the system of class yes. So that means in my classroom that if I need students to stop, look, and listen, I simply say class, class, and they respond yes, yes. Now, however I say class is how they say yes. And the reason I change it up a little bit is just to kind of get kids not bored and not accustomed to how I'm going to say it. It kind of sparks different parts in their brain, I feel, that gets them to pay attention, that I'm asking them to stop, look, and listen because I have something I need to tell them or an instruction I need to make more clear. So again, I use the class, class, yes, yes. And there are a ton of other ones. The goal for the call and response system is it doesn't really matter what you say, but what you do need to do is you need to practice what you say to students and what you're expecting of them in return. So if you say, class, class, you want them to stop, put their pencils down, look in your direction, and keep their hands still. Now, in order to do this in the classroom, the month of September is key. They need practice, rehearsal, over and over and over again. They need lots of opportunities to practice with you so that they know exactly what you expect. Now, I do think that the hardest part of this kind of routine is because you're probably going to use this signal more than any other signal in your classroom, but it should not be the only signal, but it will be the most popular. Enforcing consistency is going to be your biggest challenge. I know that it's mine. There's going to be times where I will forget to say it and I will start speaking and giving instructions without, or I will say it and students won't necessarily follow the instructions of stop, looking, and listening. Being really consistent and on top of yourself to maintain that structure is key. And it more so comes from you than it does for students. If you're finding that students are slipping and they're forgetting those structures, then it's really important to stop and then re-rehearse throughout the year constantly what it is that you expect and make it very clear. If you need to make an anchor chart, if you need to have students dramatically act it out and practice it constantly, then that's what you need to do. But that is an essential routine, is one that gets your students to stop, look, and listen with a phrase, a sound, or a series of words. Another signal is a transition signal. Now, a lot of the times teachers will use the same system for attention grabbing. They will use that for a transition. And I would caution you against that. I would use two separate signals for students, one that signals they need to stop and another one that they need to transition. And you may want to have multiple transitions for the variety of transitions that you might have in your classroom. You want to have multiple signals because it does in the long run save you time, because you don't have to explain the steps every time. If they've rehearsed it and you've gone over what it looks like when you ding the bell or ring the chime or hit that doorbell button that you have in your room, if students know that that sound means to do a series of transitional events, then it saves you needing to explain it every single time, and they become accustomed to hearing that sound and then transitioning. So some of the different transitions that you might want to consider having in your classroom are one of the get to work quickly. So if you are in a small, or if you are in a large group instructional setting and you want your students to then transition from whole group instruction to independent work, reviewing those routines and going over what you want students to do in order to get to work. Now, we're not necessarily talking about sustaining work. That's something a little bit different when we're talking about building those independent work skills. This is simply just the transition from the moment where you are on the carpet for me or in your whole group space and you are transitioning them to get to work. Now, I prefer them moving from a carpet to their desk because I've got a lot of boys and they like moving. So I use different signals. So I actually have used different signals every single year, and it kind of just comes naturally as to what I use. And again, it doesn't matter the phrase or symbol or signal that you use. What matters is that you are practicing and rehearsing the movements and actions and transition behaviors that you want your students to accomplish when you give them that signal. So I use things like minds on, go on. So there's just a little bit of a question, turn your mind on. Are you ready to go? We're moving, and then go on. I've simply just used the and go, which is really simple. But if we've practiced what it means when I say and go, that it means they quickly get up, walk to their independent workspace, get started right away. They literally have about 1.5 minutes to get started on what it is they're supposed to be doing, then practicing that transition from whole group to independent work, that 1.5, 2 minutes, it really doesn't matter what that signal is. Another one I've simply done is and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And by the time I hit 1, they should all have started their transition to move. If you've got students that really struggle with transition, you might want to slow down that signal so that they have more opportunity to opt in to doing what you're telling them to do. And I also have a different transition when we're moving in the opposite direction. So when we are moving from independent work to whole group instruction. So this happens frequently throughout the day where I do try to get them to move back and forth and transition in between those areas just to keep them moving so that they're not in one spot. I find management a bit easier, but I need to ease those transitions so it's not chaos. So I do want a signal that gets them to transition from independent work to the whole group. Now, unlike the opposite transition where we're going from whole group to independent work, that's a bit quicker. When I'm going from independent work to whole group instruction, I really like to make that a little bit more of an easy transition. So think about an alarm clock and how it slowly wakes you up. So I like to use some of the alarms that might be on, say, my cell phone or my class iPad. I like to use some of those alarms that slowly start out nice and quietly and then build up to a crescendo. And when it's finished, students know that they have a certain length of time to finish what it is that they're working on and move. Now, that transition time may not be a long period of time, but it allows them to transition. Another thing I found really helpful to move from independent work to whole group instruction is by timing that independent work time. It lets your students who might not be so strong at independent work know that this thing isn't going to last forever. 2, it keeps you really on task to not just let the independent work time go on forever. And 3, as students look up and check that clock, they can see that their time is winding down and they're getting closer and closer to that transition. So it helps them manage their time just a little bit better. And when the timer runs out, that nice slow transition will play and then students have time to get to the carpet. I believe in my school this year, we've invested in those chimes that hold the sound for a longer period of time. And the idea is if we use that whole school wide, then students would get used to what that was a transition movement of students moving from one activity to another. I'm going to share Becky's comment because I think it's such a great suggestion to always use that attention getter from the same place in the classroom, and it helps the little ones. And later on the year, it might not so matter. I would definitely say if you notice that might be something you want to start out with your students, that you say it from the same spot. So I guess I do find myself too, Becky, standing often in the middle of my carpet where most of my students can see. And that's where I will give my transition signal to go get started, as well as sitting at my guided reading table transitions them back to that whole group. So that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you also for sharing and tagging all those people to come and join us. I appreciate it. So another transitional part of your routine, and you really have to think of what your day looks like to find those parts in your day where you're constantly doing something, or it's the same thing every day. Anything that you're doing that is routine, that your students have to do the same thing every day, transitioning into a nutrition break or lunch period, or especially home time, you also want to put a routine and a system of tasks that are in place, and you want to assign a signal to that so that students understand, okay, now I know what I need to do. It does help, especially at home time, to make an anchor chart and post that with students so that it's not just you telling them what they're doing, but they're also having some voice and choice as to what that looks like. They can even help decide on the signal as well, because it does give them some ownership. So if you think of what they have to do, some of the things I like to do at the end of the day is think about the tasks that they have to do. And then I will list those and find synonyms for those words and then throw it into an acronym generator that you have online. And I can post a link to that in the show here. But if I use that acronym, I can call it, that it's fact time. So at the end of the day, if I think of the 4 things I really want my students to focus on, I want them to get their agendas, stack their chairs, clear off their table, and make sure the floor is tidy. If I look at those letters that start those words, it spells out the word fact, F-A-C-T. And then I can come up with a little saying that uses that word, like it's home time, that's a fact. And then students would know, okay, if I hear that, now I know what I need to check. I need to stack my chairs. I need to grab my agenda. I need to check the floor. I need to check the table, and it needs to be done the same thing every day. You need to make sure that you have your students practicing that routine. Now, September is or if you're back to school in August, your first month back to school is really rehearsing those routines in a real moment. So when they have been working on independent tasks and then you prompt them to do that routine and you do it over, and things will be slower and you might have to do it multiple times, but really getting them to move into that. We have the call to action routines and transition routines. Another kind of routine that I really like to think about is the movement routines. And this really comes down to how you want movement to look in your room and where you're going to place objects in your classroom, because you know that there's going to be movement in your room. So if you're transitioning from a carpet area to the table groups, is there space for students to go to their table and where they're not creating a bottleneck? So do you have multiple pathways to student table groups or to their desks? If you have a horseshoe type of design, or you have one where there's not a lot of openings in between desks, then you need to really look at what does that movement look like for my students? How will I get them back to their desks as quickly as possible without them kind of having that conversation with students? So thinking about where your desk placement is, where your movement is, and walking yourself through your space to make sure that students can transition and move around your classroom freely. Looking at the rules that you have in place and the routines of, can you sharpen your pencil? How do you ask to go to the washroom? How do you do all of those things? What happens if you need help? All of those things are things that you need to really think through as to what your students are going to do. And that often comes down to movement pieces. So there is, in the freebie that I talked to you about at the beginning of the video, I do have a freebie that goes along with tonight's video, and that freebie will list all of those different kinds of considerations that you can consider when you're talking about movement, and I will give you the link to that just at the end of the video. Finally, the last type of transition that I think is really important is the teacher is busy routine. Now, if you're teaching a split or you're teaching inquiry, you're probably going to be doing a lot of guided group instruction or small group instruction with students, which means that you're going to be often busy with one group while another student is working, or another group of students is working independently. Now, if you're a split grade teacher, this is just simply a reality of your life. So going over what you want that teacher busy routine to look like is really important. So you could use, I've had teachers use cups to signal that help is needed. You have a board behind or near your guided reading table where students can come and sign up for help, or just a whiteboard where you put names and students can write their name in a list and you can just go through it as you can get to them. You can also use the rule ask 3 before me and implement a student leadership type program where there are students that are there to help, and those are the ones that you need to go and ask before you ask the teacher. That personally is the one that I use. I really like to build up my students' problem solving skills and not always rely on me to solve their problems. However, the caveat there is whatever rule you put in place, whether you put a stop sign, whether you turn a light on, whether you signal to your students that you're not available, you also need to be aware that you're probably going to have students in your classroom where it cannot be so black and white. There needs to be exceptions to the rules, and you need to sometimes be responsive to some students. You can't just simply say, I'm not available, because I'm sure we've all been there when parents have come in and said, oh, well, you said you wouldn't help them. So talk with your students through why it is that you have that routine, what the point is of that rule, why you've put that rule in place, what you're hoping for them to be able to learn from that rule, and really talk to both students and perhaps even parents about your logic behind why you have and need that rule and put in place. And that way students know that when you are busy, it's not that you don't care or you're not willing to help them, but it's that you are trying to help them solve their own problems, or that you are giving the time and attention to some students and that their turn will come down the road. So just make sure you have any of those teacher is busy routines. You also justify to your students why you need those routines in place so that they fully understand that it's not that you're not helping them. And that might hold off some of those issues that you may come in contact with that rule. So those are the 4 main routines that I think are essential for you to put in place to help set yourself up for inquiry. There's definitely skills such as research skills, growth mindset, independent work skills. Those are all important skills to build on once these routines are in place that you want to have before students are using inquiry in the classroom, or before they become proficient at using inquiry. And hopefully by having those routines and signals and rules and pathways in place will help you adjust a little bit easier to using inquiry in your classroom and make you feel a little bit more in control. Because instead of controlling the learning and all of the aspects of what students are doing, instead controlling the routines is a nice way to change your focus as to what it is you still feel you have control over in your classroom. And from one control freak to another, it helps when you've got a lot of routines in place to help you adjust a little bit better to letting go of some of the instructional control that inquiry sometimes brings into our life. So that's all I have for you tonight. If you would like the routine freebie that I talked about in the show, you can go to go.madlylearning.com/library sign up. So again, go.madlylearning.com/library sign up. If you go there, you will be prompted to sign up for my free resource library. And inside that library, you will find the routines planning page in there, as well as a whole bunch of other freebies that I've talked about in other videos, so you can get access to that right away. And you'll sign up there and I will send you an email right away that you have to confirm, and followed shortly thereafter by your password so that you can go ahead and log into the free resource library. So hopefully that resource will help you think of some of the routines and structures that you might have in your classroom and pre-plan them out so that when you go back to school, you are well prepared and you have a clear idea of what you want the routines and structures to look like in your classroom. So tonight's episode is episode 60. And if you want the show notes or any of the links that go to the YouTube replay or podcast replay, you can find those on the show page at www.teachingwithinquiry.com. And if you want to read the blog post and get the links to other resources that are match with this topic, you can find that at www.madlylearning.com. And next week, we have an amazing show planned for you. I have my friend Shauna Rao from The Rowdy Teacher coming on to the show live, and we are going to be talking about spiraling your math instruction. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss that, I already have about 130 teachers signed up to come and listen about spiraling their math. Shauna and I are so excited. We're busy all week planning this event for you for next Monday at 9 p.m. and you certainly don't want to miss it. So if you want to sign up for that, I will drop the link on my page today so that you can make sure that you get notified when we go live about that one next Monday at 9. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait to hear about Shauna's tips. So anyways, thanks very much for joining me, and I will see you next Monday at 9. Talk to you later.